Hey guys, welcome back, and if you were around during the launch of PlayStation 3, you know exactly what this game franchise is. Anyways, let's kick it off with the game that started it all, Resistance: Fall of Man, released in 2006 as a launch title for the PS3. So, we're in an alternate 1950s, where World War II never happened cause the Chimera swept out of Russia and consumed the entirety of Europe. So you play as a US Army Ranger Sergeant Nathan Hale, who gets sent to the UK to help the British forces. Okay, so right off the bat, Hale gets infected with the Chimeran virus during an ambush, but cause like he's the main character, he doesn't turn into a monster or anything. Instead, he gets the ability to regenerate a portion of his health. And the story is presented through these retrospective narrations by a British officer named Rachel Parker, giving the whole thing a military documentary vibe. Okay, so conceptually, this is awesome, but as a protagonist, Hale had no personality, despite the game constantly reminding us that he's infected and changing. But you know what? I didn't play this first game for any of that. I played it to shoot aliens in the face, and holy shit, does this game deliver on that. Okay, so mechanically this game is a bridge between the old school arena shooters and the cover shooters that were about to dominate the industry. Like there's no sprint button, there's no regen health, and you gotta look for health vials. And the game demands that you pay attention. It's kinda challenging and there's no hand holding, and if you stand out in the open, you're gonna get shredded cause the enemy AI is pretty aggressive, so you gotta use every single tool at your disposal. And speaking of tools, this is where I believe the game design shines the brightest. So instead of limiting you to 2 weapons like every other modern shooter, the first game lets you carry an entire arsenal, and the weapons are like the stars of the show, each with a unique alternate fire mode. However, the game isn't without its flaws, and looking back, there are a few glaring issues. Okay, first off, the art direction is depressingly grey and brown. Yes, it captures the war-torn Europe aesthetic, but it completely washes out the visuals. And the level design also suffers from this endless hallway syndrome, cause you're mostly just moving forward through linear corridors, clearing out waves of enemies with very little room for creative flanking or strategy. And then there's the checkpoint system, which gets a bit annoying. But despite its rough edges and clunky controls, this first Resistance game is a decent shooter that laid the foundation for the franchise. Okay, so fast forward 2 years to 2008, and we get Resistance 2. The war has escalated and the Chimera have brought the fight to the US. Nathan Hale is back, and now he's part of a specialized Black Ops unit called the Sentinels, made up of other infected soldiers who have enhanced abilities. And the story is way more action-packed, also ditching the documentary style of the first game. Okay, so Hale is still fighting off the infection which is consuming his body, all while trying to stop the Chimeran and their creepy psychic leader, Daedalus. Now, I'm just gonna rip the band-aid off. Resistance 2 is easily the most polarizing game in the entire franchise, cause Insomniac looked at the massive success of Call of Duty 4 and Halo, and apparently decided that chasing industry trends was a better idea than sticking to what made their first game unique. So, you're now limited to carrying only 2 weapons at a time. You also have regen health now, meaning you just hide behind cover until the blood effect fades off your screen and pop back up to shoot. These changes completely neutered the tactical variety that made the first game so special. Instead of feeling like a one-man army juggling 10 different sci-fi weapons to creatively dismantle alien hordes, you're forced to constantly drop cool guns just to make sure you have enough ammo in a generic assault rifle. And cause you now have regen health, the devs had to figure out a way to actually kill you, which leads us to the absolute worst part of Resistance 2, the cheap instant kill enemies. Like the Fury, which are these aquatic chimera that swim in the water, and if you so much as dip your toes in water, they instantly kill you. Then there are the chameleons, invisible enemies that sprint at you and one-shot you from melee range. But it's not all doom and gloom. If you can look past the frustrating gameplay loop, Resistance 2 does offer some incredible visual spectacle, like the environments are way more vibrant and colorful. Also, the scale of the game is kinda massive, and the boss fights are these enormous set pieces. Sure, these fights are mostly just scripted shooting galleries where you shoot the glowing weak spots, but they look cool as hell. And the absolute best part of Resistance 2, however, is its ending. So after destroying Daedalus and his fleet with a fission bomb, the blast accelerates Hale's infection. You crash land, and in the final moments of the game, you completely succumb to the virus. You turn to your squadmate Joseph Capelli, completely consumed by the Chimera. Capelli just looks at you and says, "Forgive me, sir," and shoots you point blank in the head. It's a shockingly dark ending that finally gives Hale's story a memorable payoff, even if the journey to get there was a bit frustrating.
Forgive me, sir. It was an honor.
So before we get to the third mainline game, we gotta look at the spin-off that dropped in 2009 for the PSP, Resistance Retribution. Developed by Sony Bend Studio, this game takes place between the first two games. But instead of Hale, we get a new protagonist named James Grayson, a British Royal Marine. And let me tell you, Grayson is the absolute man. So right at the beginning of the game, Grayson discovers his own brother Johnny inside a Chimeran conversion center, being turned into an alien meat puppet. Forced by protocol and basic mercy, Grayson puts a bullet in him. This traumatizes him so deeply that he goes rogue and starts blowing up conversion centers across Europe purely out of vengeance. Eventually, the British military catches him and sentences him to death for deserting, but he gets bailed out by the French resistance, who need his expertise for Operation Overstrike. Okay, so Grayson is such a breath of fresh air compared to Hale. Like, he's a sarcastic, cynical badass who genuinely carries the entire narrative. And he also has a whole romantic subplot with a French resistance fighter named Rain Bouchard. Okay, so the story gets incredibly dark. And at one point, Bouchard deliberately infects herself with the Chimeran virus to create a serum, but it goes horribly wrong. She turns into a monster, and Grayson is then forced to kill her. It's fantastic writing for a portable game. And cause this was on the PSP, which only had one analog stick, Bend Studio had to change the perspective to third person. Okay, so Retribution is a phenomenal game that feels more faithful to the spirit of the OG game than Resistance 2 ever did, despite the shift to a third person perspective. The only real negatives are that movement feels a bit sluggish, like you can't manually crouch or roll, and the auto-aim makes the combat a little too easy at times, but overall, it's an absolute gem. Alright, let's move on to 2011. Insomniac Games is back, and they're ready to deliver the absolute pinnacle of the franchise, Resistance 3. The year is 1957, 4 years after Capelli blew your brains out. The war is over and humanity lost. Like 90% of the human population is either dead or converted. The US is a freezing, post-apocalyptic wasteland cause like the Chimera opened a massive wormhole over New York to cool the planet down. So we now play as Joseph Capelli. He has been dishonorably discharged and has given up the fight completely. He's just trying to survive in some subterranean hideout with his wife and their sick little kid Jack. Okay, so the game kicks off when Dr. Malakov, the crazy Russian scientist from the previous games, shows up and tells Capelli that they need to travel to New York to destroy the central tower and close the wormhole, or else the entire planet is gonna freeze. So what follows is a brutal cross-country road trip that completely ditches the generic military shooter vibes of the previous game and leans heavily into a gritty, emotional survival horror experience. Like, the narrative stakes are so personal and emotionally grounded. Capelli isn't some super soldier trying to save the planet. He's just a desperate father trying to save his wife and kid. Anyways, mechanically, Resistance 3 is a massive apology for the sins of Resistance 2. Insomniac listened to the fans and brought back everything we loved. The 2-weapon limit is gone and the weapon wheel is back. Health regen is also gone, and like, they didn't just bring the old stuff back, they kinda innovated. Like, now you have a weapon upgrade system, and also the enemy AI is significantly improved. Resistance 3 is the peak of the series, but unfortunately Resistance 2 left such a bad taste that this game completely bombed in terms of sales. The only real criticism I would say is that the ending feels a bit rushed and anticlimactic. There's no epic final boss fight, but regardless, Resistance 3 is a great game that deserved so much better than it got. And finally, we arrive at the depressing end of the franchise, Burning Skies, released in 2012 for the PS Vita. This wasn't made by Insomniac, it was handed off to Nihilistic Software, and man, does it show. The story takes us back to 1951, focusing on the day the Chimera invaded New York. We play as Tom Riley, a firefighter who gets separated from his family. So Riley teams up with Ellie Martinez, leader of a militia group called the Minutemen, to search for his family and stop a rogue human scientist named Richard Gorel, who wants to use Chimeran technology to control an alien army. Okay, so I'll give the game this. Ellie Martinez is actually a pretty decent, well-written character who carries a lot of the narrative weight. And also the game does hold this distinction of being the first true dual analog first-person shooter on a handheld console. It proved that you could play a standard FPS game on the Vita without having to use the terrible lock-on systems of the PSP era, but that is pretty much where the praise ends. Cause like Burning Skies is a soulless, bare-bones tech demo that completely misunderstands what makes this franchise great. The campaign is extremely short, you can blast through the whole thing in under 5 hours. And cause it's a Vita game, the devs felt the overwhelming need to force touchscreen gimmicks down your throat. Like to use the alternate fire modes on your weapons, you gotta like swipe or tap the screen. On top of that, the game lacks any real polish. The graphics look muddy, the animations are stiff, and the audio compression is just atrocious. And the story is totally generic, and it ultimately feels like a cheap Call of Duty knockoff. It was a massive disappointment that essentially put the final nail in the coffin for the entire franchise.